We're going to go ahead and get started with our discussion. You want to open up, Pastor Kay?
Sure. Let's open up with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we just want to thank you, God, and we just bless you for this day. God, we just want to thank you for how you have brought us through the challenges that we may have had and the anxiety we may have experienced. But God, we just want to thank you that you are our God, you are our keeper, and you have allowed us to see and be in this moment. So Father, I just pray that you would just bless all of the listeners and viewers who are online with us today, and I just pray that you bless this discussion and that we will leave from this place feeling encouraged, empowered, and just knowing that with you we can conquer any and all things. So we just thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. So anyway, we are here today. We wanted to have a discussion and wanted to talk about the storms. We had talked before about Mark 4, and in Mark 4 is the story about Peter and the disciples who were crossing over onto the other side when this horrific storm came up. And it was a storm like they hadn't seen before, and it was so disturbing until Peter rushed down into the bows of the boat and to speak to Jesus, to ask Jesus. In fact, not to speak to him, he was practically yelling at him, you know, Jesus, Jesus, do you care that we not perish? And so when we were thinking about that storm, we were thinking in terms of that there have been so many storms that we have experienced as a church. And through each one of those storms and each one of those challenges, even though they were difficult, each one was still unique, and it really tested our faith. But at the end of the day, or at the end of each storm, is that it was just that. It was an end. An end came to the storm. God navigated us through them. And so we just want to kind of just to share our testimony, to share our witness with you of how faithful God is. And as a reminder, I think what's one of those songs Pastor Queen is saying, when we look back over our life and think things over, and we can truly say that God has been really good to us, or, you know, when we just think about the goodness of Jesus, and it's that thinking about. And so on today, or this evening, we want to take this moment, if you will, to reflect about the challenges that we have faced as a congregation. And some of the challenges were not only as a congregation, but faced from a national level, like where we are now, as a national level, but even to another extent globally. So we just wanted to share that, share our experiences, and just talk about how good God is, even in the times when it seems like those winds were just not going to stop blowing. And hopefully from that we will leave you with some encouragement. Right?
Amen. So we were sitting around thinking about all the storms that we've covered, not just as a congregation, but as a nation. And we actually had to jot them down, because it's amazing how once you've passed the storm, how you can forget that we really did face these storms. So just a few of them that we faced together. In 2001, on March 9th, it was a huge storm at the loss of our leading pastor at the time. During that 2001, though, not just the passing, but it was a storm for your ordination.
Yeah.
It was a storm. For you, definitely.
Just the calling before the ordination.
Right. The storm before the storm of the storm. So in 2002, we faced the D.C. sniper, which I forgot all about that one until you mentioned it, dipping and weaving at the gas station, trying to make sure you didn't get shot. 2008, the financial crisis that we overcame as a congregation and as a nation. And in 2018, to have our federal government shut down was a crisis in itself, which brings us to 2020, 2 years later, facing yet another storm. So when you look at it from that perspective, These are just 5 storms that we faced collectively in 19 years?
Yeah.
19 years? Mm-hmm. So we get ready to have an anniversary of storms also. But as we were looking at these, we want to talk to you and encourage you as a congregation. But as we went through the list of these storms, I can remember where I was as an individual.
Yeah.
And how we faced it, how I faced it, and where I was spiritually determined how I faced each of these storms. So let's go back to the first one.
Yeah, okay.
Since we talked, you want to go back there?
Come on.
Or you want to skip it? Or you
No, we're ready.
All right, so let's start with 2001, which was March 9th, the passing of Pastor Richard Johnson III, and all the storms that came even after that. So it wasn't just the storm itself, but all of the following storms. So you want to start?
Sure. The question is where?
Yeah.
Where to start? Yeah, March 9th. I guess in talking about that, I'm speaking about that, first of all, as his wife, the mother of his children, then definitely as one of the leaders in the church. I was, carrying all of those roles. Yeah, March 9th, when his passing really, really, really caught me off guard because I really thought he was going to survive. I really, really thought that he was going to be okay and was going to make it back, make it back to church. And when he did pass, I just couldn't understand God at all. I just could not understand him. Here we had just built this church. We had moved into this church. Our first service was actually, New Year's Eve of 2000, going into 2001. He preached in January, all of January. Was it all of January? And the first Sunday, the first Sunday in February. And that was it. And so, of course, there's no way that in my mind that I'm thinking that he's not going to make it. Right. He has got to make it because we have this brand new church building. We got a $28,000 a month mortgage. Let me repeat that, $28,000 a month mortgage, which did not include utilities, it didn't include salaries, it included nothing. And so when he passed, I'm like, God, I really don't know what you're up to. I mean, I just don't understand you right now. I don't understand the situation. Look at what we have in front of us. We got this mortgage. He's the leader. He's the father of our kids. He's my husband, the whole 9 yards, and he's gone. And what are we supposed to do? And so, for the longest time, even as we were going through it, it was extremely difficult because I was still questioning him. I was still questioning God and his decision and his choice, if you will, and allowing him to go. So I had to wrestle with a lot of that.
And that's one thing about storms too, the idea that you're facing the directness of the storm itself, but then the other storms that can come up that you need to simultaneously deal with. So the one thing that I think about when I look at all three of you is, how are you in the middle of a storm that you're trying to get your arms around personally, but then you also responsible to lead the people out of the storm? So Pastor Queen, you had a lot of that burden during that time of being the glue that kind of held us together during the storm while we were shaking, but at the same time dealing with the storm of losing a friend.
Yeah.
Well, you're absolutely right. I was Peter, asking the Lord to, since you got me here, let me walk on the water. Because even though in through the years and concluding with the year of 1999, Pastor Richard Johnson had trained us as pastors, but we wasn't taught to be a pastor. Little would I know that the Lord would call him home during such a glorious time. We came into here, I mean, we were praising God. Mm-hmm. We were praising God, and for that to come, that storm to come to us, and to look at one who has triumphed over the years. We've been through up and down, up and down, up and down, and then to come here to look at the crowd that we had, because we came in here with about almost 800 people. Mm-hmm. And so here was the test. And you got to know that when God has called you and allowed you to step up to the plate, I know now what I didn't know then, that he will equip you. Because I survived. I stood on the water. I kept my eye on the prize. But I tell you, it was a time that it seems as though that for myself to mourn, it was hard. Because we had to keep our heads up. We had to lead, because he taught us that even though the leader will or can be called home, that ministry shouldn't suffer. And so with the able bodies that he left here in leadership, able bodies, we came together in a strange land, brand new land, only with the grace of God. And Daphne, that's how I survived. And I still can't believe. I know who did it, but I can't believe we come this far by faith.
Amen. And Pastor Queen, you actually said one thing. You said it was a test, right? But you learned some things through that storm. We discovered how strong we were as a congregation, and that we really were trained leaders to help press through. Even though we were barely holding on internally, we knew we had to press through. So in the midst of that storm, and this is for all three of you, what lesson did you learn in that storm that you felt probably helped to prepare us for storms that still had to come?
You know, for me, during that time, we had the opportunity to. One of the things that most folks may or may not know was that our founding pastor, he was an avid walker, and so we would do a lot of walking in the morning. In fact, we were neighbors, and so we spent a lot of time in the mornings walking. And during those walks, it was really not a lot about church and religion as much it was about life. And if you knew him, you knew that that generally was his concern about people, passion about people, and passion about their day-to-day life. But one of the things that we did here at First Christian, and most of the folks who've been around here for a while also know, is that we mimicked or modeled our ministries after biblical patterns, if you would, and biblical patterns around different characters within the Bible. Mm-hmm. And so, in some sense, our founding pastor really was, for us, that Moses. Right. But in his teaching and in our learning in those early years, we learned that for every Moses, there was a Joshua. And so, while we may not have felt we were equipped to walk in Joshua's shoes, Pastor Queen, it was through that teaching that we were being equipped. And it's such a blessing to know when you can look back over it. And we sometimes talk about cliches about, if God can bring you to it, he can bring you through it. Well, it's a cliche, but when you've done it, then you could really speak to it and speak to it candidly, right? And so I think one of the things that that I learned as a result of that and the teaching in those early years, that it just wasn't establishing a foundation for us individually, but corporately and collectively, we were learning not only how to lead, but how to relate. And in our leading and in our relationship, we learned that in the process that we went through, that some things had to be jettisoned or separated, right, during that process. And we had a lot of falling off, right? We had some folks who are not here with us today and felt they needed to go in a different direction. But because we were taught leadership, relationship, we learned how to relate to those who were here. And as a result of relating to those who were here, that kept us together. Because one of the things that we really relied on was each other. And so during that time of relying on each other, that enabled us to get through this, and through that era, if you would. And I think that's one of the keys when you're in leadership, is that you don't simply lead by yourself, right? I mean, obviously our focus is on our vertical relationship with God, but horizontally he puts people in our lives and around us. And it was through those relationships that we really were able to move, if you would, from one phase to the other. So for me, it was recognizing that while Moses led us to, we had Joshua and others to lead us through.
Right. Joshua.
I don't know about all of that. Oh, lessons learned. I think for me, of course, just the uniqueness of the position that I was in, you know, and leading while grieving is an extremely hard thing to do. And what I know now, but wasn't exactly in place then, is that when leadership is going through a difficulty, a challenge like what we were going through, you really need someone of support outside of you where you can talk and be who you are, as opposed to being always on and having to be the leader. You know, I recall sitting in my living room, and, you know, this was right after he had passed and before the funeral, and I'm consoling congregants. I'm telling them it's going to be all right, you know, when, you know, I'm saying to in myself, I'm going like, I don't know. I have no clue what's going to happen here. You know what I mean? And so, you know, and looking back on that, you know, thank God they're onto me. I mean, we don't have that many churches who've been through that experience directly like we have. I mean, you know, we know of churches, of course, but to have that impact that had upon us, it is really crucial. It is really crucial for self-care. It is really crucial that when leaders are going through, that they have someone that they can go and talk to and be able to be fully who they are and can disclose all of their fears, all of their concerns, without the fear of being judged or saying, oh, well, you must not be a Christian because you have some doubts or you are afraid or whatever the case may be, because I'm trying to balance that. So, you know, in my particular case, yeah, I could grieve, but it was still not full grieving, because, you know, I'm trying to stay strong for my children, who at that particular time they were 12 and 18. I'm trying to wrap my mind around this whole thing, you know, where you're going. So, yeah, doing that for that segment, to learn what I did learn, of course, is that no matter how bad it is, you will come out on the other side. You might not like what it looks like on the other side, but he will bring you out on the other side. You just have to trust him. I really had to come to a place of totally trusting him, even though I totally did not understand what he was doing and why he allowed what he allowed. I just could not understand that. But, you know, what's that quote? If you can't follow his hand, you trust his heart.
Yep.
I think that's what it is.
If you can't see his hand, trust his
Yeah,
heart.
so I think for me, that was the huge learning piece for me is I really don't know where your hand is. I really don't know what you're doing. But I'm just going to trust that you are God, and I'm going to trust that when we get on the other side of this, shore, we're going to land safe.
And when we talk about, because I like the fact that Pastor D, you touched on relationship, right? And you're being strong for a congregation, for your children. With any storm, because don't forget we are in a Bible study, right? So we want to make some notes. So when it comes to weathering a storm, relationship is key.
Yeah.
So that if I need to be strong over here, I still have somebody over here that I can be as weak and vulnerable as I need to. So that's a takeaway as we go through all of these storms. And you mentioned Joshua. And the one thing before Moses left, and then God reminded him when Moses was gone, is to be courageous. I am always with you. And even when we can't see his hand in the storm, God is really there. So between us losing Pastor Johnson in March and your consecration, ordination, licensing, and everything, when did you realize God really was with you? Or was it always, I was trusting your heart and I couldn't see the hand, even at the time of your ordination? Because that was a storm after the storm.
Oh my God. Yeah. How much time we got on that one? It was interesting, and I'll get to that point. About a year or two before Johnson passed, and we were in the midst of the building had started, the construction had started. And he said to me, we were in a meeting with our architect, CPA, and so we were already talking about, you remember, the second phase, because how it normally runs is that, when a church is built, it will be an increase in a membership, which means you're going to quickly move into your second phase. And we were leaving from that meeting, and Johnson said to me, he said, I hear what they're saying about this increase. He said, but I don't believe that's going to happen for us. He said, something is going to happen, and he said, what's going to happen? The covers are going to be pulled back off of First Christian, and we're going to see who's in there. And when he said that, it really, I remember my stomach just flipped a little bit, because he didn't say what it was, and he indicated he didn't know what it was. Now, I don't know if he did or not or whatever, but the reason my stomach flipped is because whenever he made any type of prophetic statement like that, it was going to be true. So that meant something was going to take place. Did he tell you something like that?
No, he didn't. But what that reminds me of, Pastor, is as you mentioned, when in Joshua 1, there was at least 3 occasions, right, when Joshua was commanded to be strong and of good courage, right? So knowing that there is something to come, sometimes God gives us that guidance, right? Yeah. And so as you were sharing that's what came to mind for me, right? Is this an opportunity to reset your courage, right? And your strength, because we oftentimes cannot see what's around the corner.
Right.
But if we are strong, if we are courageous during those times, we may not have everything that it takes to get through it, but we can rest on the fact that there is a God, and because he has brought us through things before, then that's our confidence that we have, is being able to hold on to that. It doesn't help in the midst of it, but certainly we know that that if we've seen it done before, it gives us that hope and that reassurance. So that's what was coming to mind as you were sharing that.
Yeah.
It's almost like a prepping. Like he's trying to give us little hints that there's a storm on the horizon.
There's one coming.
Yeah, it never just shows up.
Right.
There are warning signs in the atmosphere.
And he was very clear about that. He was very clear. And so that prophecy didn't really come to me until, of course, after everything happened, but it really became clear when I felt God was calling me to the position of pastor. And that's when it really blew up, where, to be honest, it really could, from my perspective, I just thought the church was going to split, you know. But what I later learned, that it was only a few pebbles in a can, and a few pebbles in a can can make a whole lot of noise, and it can make it seem like it's the majority, but it wasn't, thank God, you know. And that was, my prayer, that, God, if this is what you're calling me to do, then you're going to have to make a way for this to happen. And so you have to deal with that storm. And it was on my day of ordination, and I was sitting right there on that front pew. And as I was sitting there, and God just dropped into my spirit and said, this is why the battle was so hot. It was to stop you from getting to this point. And all up until that time, I was just, I just really trusted him, because my thing is, first of all, when I felt that God was calling me to this position, I had to be honest with you. My response to God was, you had a pastor. Right. So, I'm just being for real. You have one here, so why are we doing this? So it wasn't a thing that I was trying to, trying to be power hungry, trying to, take the position. That wasn't it. And I think we had discussed, Pastor Queen was in it. He was making it clear that, no, he knew what God had called him to do. And he was very clear about it. And he went through a horrible time as well, And again, I think part of us, we were so busy trying, I think, in a way of protecting each other, that we didn't really share with each other what was really going on with us. It was much later, and Pastor Queen to speak to that for himself, it was much later that he finally shared what he experienced. And that was very traumatic, what he was dealing with, as far as, it's funny when you can have someone sitting at your table and dining with you, and then all of things start changing, and you really find out that that person that was sitting at your table really wasn't all what they represented to be. Oh, yeah. And I'm just putting that very kindly.
Storms will bring that out.
Storm will bring out your personality. Storm will reveal the truth.
Right.
And I made it clear to the board, because I had to get it clear from God first.
Right.
That one of the things when we came in here, one of the themes we had, when faith becomes sight. Mm-hmm. And the Lord knows I love Hebrews 11.
Right.
And so I didn't know. I thought the site was here, the building. But my faith was tried until the site came. I said, Lord, you don't want me. That time I was Moses. I'm not eloquent of speech and that, and you don't want, he said, I didn't ask you to pastor. I told you to leave right now. And so I made it clear to them. Yes, I had people come to the house and said that you're weak, and this, that, and the other, and, I was like Nehemiah. Nehemiah had not only trouble outside the camp, but he had it in the camp. His people, not following God. And I just was determined. And through that faith, and my faith grew stronger. That's what I have today. My faith grew stronger in allowing God. And it was like a breath of relief when Pastor Kay called us to the office. She could breathe at that time, but I got a breath of relief that, I believe the Lord is calling me to be pastor. I'm saying, well, I'm glad he called somebody, because this is not going to work, But that's how God works it out. He just wants, and you've heard me say it before, to First Christian, to all of you, that stay on the ship.
Yeah.
Yeah, just stay on the ship. And if you stay on the ship, not a soul will be lost. And those who have remained on the ship, we have seen the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living.
Pastor Queen, I thank you for mentioning that last point, stay in the ship. That was one of the messages that you shared with us during that season that you were leading us. And I've shared that with you maybe once or twice, and certainly with other congregants. it was important because we were in a storm, and how appropriate it was to remind the congregation that they need to stay in the ship during that season, because that was where safety was.
Yeah.
And as long as we stayed in that place, that was safety. And it was a powerful message. As I recall from back then, when it was shared, it brought about a level of comfort and a level of confidence that we could get through it. And it was what we needed for that season. And so I thank God for him using you for sharing it in that season for us, because it really was what we as a congregation needed, because we were going through. I mean, we really were going through. And that message was such an encouraging and uplifting message for us. But to be quite honest, there were some who got out of the boat, out of the ship. But as God would have it, the ship carried those who remained in it to the other side.
Right.
And that's the blessing in it all.
Right.
But
And see, y'all were a little stronger in your faith at this time than I was, because I wanted to kick the people out the boat. Because that's me being real, right?
Yeah, Minister Daphne.
Right.
But you weren't Minister Daphne back then.
There. I was just usher.
Yeah.
So
we did say we were going to have some candid conversation.
He's been chained.
Because, right. But the night of, but this was something that I learned in the storm, though, is the night of the vote, right? And I was an usher, and my faith wasn't as strong. It was still a little streak in me, a little bit that I had. And to see people leaving or the attack on you was probably the first time I really thought I could be Peter and slice some not heads, ears, right? Ears off, right? But it also confirmed in the storm that I was home and that this was family. Because you found out where those bonds are when you're in the storm, who you're going to go down or rise in the storm with, or who you're going to kick out into the wet, into the rain. So I think as a family during that storm, to me, it solidified like First Christian for me.
Yeah, it was something that we had to go through, you know. And in any church, you're always going to have turnover. That's just part of the church, because the church is an organism, and so there's always going to be some shedding, and it's not necessarily anything wrong with the shedding. I think during that whole time too, it really taught me about warfare and what warfare can look like. And I'll never forget, in preparation for it, leading up to it, it was really overwhelming for me. I remember I lost weight. I couldn't eat the whole 9 yards. And I don't know if you remember, it was before the vote, and you said to me, oh, you worried about that? Oh, girl, that's going to be okay. And, you know, and I was like, I don't know where she got that confidence from. But because... I knew what I believed God had said to me. And that's another thing, too, is God would give you a word, and you believe that's him, but you really got to put it to faith. You got to walk in it to really find out if it is him. Does it make sense what I just say? You know what I mean? I believed it was him because of certain things that took place that, for me, felt like it was confirmation. And one of the biggest ones was when... I went to talk to Reverend Ushery, who's in heaven now, and she and I was sitting down in a restaurant, Rusty Scupper, up in Baltimore, and we were having lunch. And you know, of course, Pastor Queen always said he wasn't interested, and I'm like, well, who gonna take this him, you know? So I was talking to her, and she was like, yeah, I figured you were gonna come this way. She said, that's not for me, Deborah, and she said, that's for you. And I was like, girl, let me tell you something. God going to have to come down here and sit across this table like you sitting across the table from me. He's going to have to tell me himself that this is for me. No, you know, I was first lady. I did that. I'm a good number 2, you know. So now when she said that, so what happened was Reverend Tim Green, who was at the particular time fixing the memorial site, you know, where Johnson is laid to rest right now. And he stopped, and I didn't know Tim like that. And so Pastor Tim stopped me when I was coming in. I don't even know if he was a pastor at that particular time. But he stopped me, and he said, I felt that the Lord wanted me to share something with you. And I could tell he was a little nervous, and he said he was. You know, he said, I don't know, but I'm just going to share something with you. And he started talking, and this man was saying things that only my husband and I knew. And it stopped me dead in my tracks. And it was to the point, he was saying so much, it was to the point I had to say to him, I need you to hold up right now. Because I had to process this. Because see, first of all, with me in processing, I got to figure out, now, have you been somewhere? Do you know somebody that know me or whatever? Is it somewhere possible that you could have gotten this information and you're now coming back to me? And I had to come up with a zero on that. And so I know God was using him to get my attention. So he used that. And then it was later on, after my meeting with Reverend Ushery, I'm sitting in the office, and he walks in. He said, can I see you again? And I said to myself, no, I don't want to see you again. Well, okay. So he comes in, and he sits down across from me from the desk, and he says, Deborah, it's time for you to get up. And she had just said, yeah. And I was like, you have got to be kidding me. You know, and so the night of the vote, the day before the vote, Reverend Ushery said, she said, you need to go somewhere and consecrate yourself. You know, you need to go separate yourself, leave your home. And I remember I'm like, where am I going to go? And I remember going to a hotel right on Riva Road. I think it's the Marriott was out there. And I said, I just need a room for the day. I guess that could have sounded a little funny, couldn't it?
A little suspicious.
Just a little suspicious. So I did. So they were like, oh, you know, at first they looked at me and they were like, okay, we'll do that, you know. And I just shut it down. And I just stayed in prayer the whole day. I just stayed secluded and just went home in time enough to go to bed. And I see where I needed that, because during that whole process, it was emotionally draining. And my only thing I asked God two things. I said, I think for the vote, it had to be at least, 84% was in the bylaws, 85, 84%. I said, let it be over that. I don't want to be anywhere near it. I didn't want to speak. I didn't want to say anything, because I didn't want it to come over like I was campaigning and trying to convince people that they needed to vote for me. And I wasn't going to vote, because I wouldn't even want it to appear that even my one vote would somehow help to push it over. I didn't want to speak. I didn't want to do vote. I didn't want to do anything, no part. And sitting there on that row, I had to have consecrated myself beforehand in order not to say what I could have said and not to do what I could have done, because it would have been out of character and would not have been appropriate for someone who's going to take a leadership position. And that's another thing we learn as leaders, that sometimes we have to suck it up.
That's why I didn't cut no ears off. Because God knew I was going to be a leader one day. All right, so let's transition up to one more year, because literally that was 2001. And then the DC sniper was in 2002. So that's a whole different kind of storm, which wasn't directly a First Christian impacted storm, but still impacted each of us in different ways. Mm-hmm. So some of you live in PG County, which was a little more to the fire line. So, Pastor D, what were you doing when the sniper was making its way?
Well, I'm not Mike Tyson, but I did some weaving and bobbing. You know, to be quite honest, you know, there's a practical side to all of us, right? I mean, you know, we certainly having a facade about us, about the things that God can do. But when it comes to the real practical matter, there were many days I would pass one of the middle schools, I think it was middle school, Benjamin Tasker, in Prince George's County. I would pass that location, and you know, it wasn't a thing for me to change my moods, my patterns, right? And so that was one location I avoided. And like many of our congregation, I know, you know, when we went out, we wanted to make sure people knew where we were, where we were going, and when we were expected to get back. I mean, that was important then, because it was a time when there was fear, and it was rampant, and we did not have a clue as to where or when the next one would be, and so it was. I mean, we laugh at it now, and you know, we even had prediction of who the person was, what did they look like, and to most of our surprise, it wasn't that. And so, you know, that just kind of shocked some of us, you know, right? Most of you know what we're talking about there, but nonetheless, it was just one of those times when the fear was so powerful that it just gripped us in ways that we just hadn't been touched before. I mean, that truly was true fear. Just going back and forth to work, your normal day-to-day operation, it became more of a task and one that it took a lot of effort because you were just on the lookout. And so for me, as I think it was for most people, it was one thing that I was just so conscientious of, not only for myself, but for my family and loved ones, right? Because you just did not know what was to become and what you expected of it. But as all of our storms, one of the things we do realize that oftentimes when we're in the midst of them, it's difficult to see the other side or see the end, right? Because we're so bombarded with everything that's happening at the time, and what was happening at the time was real. And when you saw people who were affected, their lives were affected, families, and even children. And the event that happened at Benjamin Tasker was there was a young elementary school, a middle school age student who was shot. I mean, it just hit you in ways that you were just not used to or accustomed to. And it was then, and if you had children, and I did, it was just a concern that, wow, this could happen to myself or a loved one, and there may not be anything I could do about it. And that really was the most trying part of it, was you couldn't control it. And most of us like to be in some element of control of every parts of our lives, and that was one area where we didn't have the control.
During that particular time, kids couldn't go outside? They cut off recreation? I mean, outdoor recess time. Yeah, it was crazy. Because I remember we used to have the Harvest Fest, and so we were debating whether we were going to go through it with or not, because you just didn't know. No, and because remember one time they were saying, oh, he was driving a white truck, and at that time I had a white trooper. And I was like, oh my God, you know. But yeah, that was a difficult time as well.
When you were just doing the recap of how we had to adjust our lives, I didn't realize how much this incident, this storm, actually shadows a lot of some of the changes that we need to make now in that storm. And being able to find the balance between practical concern and then fear that the word says we're not supposed to have. Where is that balance?
Balance between fear,
fear, being concerned or mindful, and fear. You know, we're told we're not supposed to fear, right?
Right.
But I'm dipping and weaving at the Exxon. You know, where's the line between the practical aspect and the spiritual aspect?
Well, I think part of it comes with information. The more informed you are. So even though people were zigzagging at the gas station, you know, but based off of the information we had, it was a reaction that would have been practical in a way, because people were being killed at gas stations and at bus stops. And so So there would be an element of concern, but I think like where we are today, it has a lot to do with the information and getting the right information. The issue that we have today, of course, is that the information is changing by the minute. Right. But what we do have to rely on is, the washing of the hands, the social distancing, and understand with the numbers, understand that there's going to be a peak, but it's only going to be natural because more people are going to be tested. So I think with the spiritual and the practical is understanding the information that you do have at hand. And the spiritual part comes in is I have this information, but I'm still in conjunction with that, I still need to implement the practical, but I'm still trusting God at the same time to keep myself calm, because being stressed out, anxious is not going to get us anywhere. But we just kind of need to calm it down. And so I think that's where that peace come in, which is why one of the reasons we have the 6 a.m. prayer is to kind of bring people in to have that moment of calm, of corporate calm that, it's going to come out.
And the scripture says, I think that some in the faith takes that out of context, the scripture. And that is that he says that he's not given us the spirit of fear, but he's given us power. And in that power, it is, we cannot be so spiritually that we're ignorant of what's going on in the world.
Right.
God has given us power. Power under control.
Yeah.
And some of the control is to be aware of your surroundings. During that time, the brothers in this church, Pastor K, I don't even know whether any of you remember, were taking the wives' cars out and gassing them up for them. And so that's concern. God would not have us to fear man, but he would have us to be open-eyed, right. Know your surroundings, know what's about you, in order that, just like what's going on now, is that some of the young folks are saying, I'm not worried about that, but that's not really, that's not God. God would have you to be very concerned, and if you're not concerned, be concerned for your fellow brother or your sister. Right. And so during that time, actually, about a block away from my college, Baltimore City Police stopped them folk, but they didn't know who they was at that time. They didn't know who they was until they got that back down here. So they were traveling, And how do I know that we at First Christian, we took control as we should, and that is to protect our children, our families, but we still had church. See, fear will keep you away from church. Fear will keep you. Even in this virus that's going around, it's not the fear of keeping us away from church. It's order. Right. Because the scripture also tells us to render unto Caesar what Caesar. The government is Caesar. And we follow orders that it can bring this thing into subjection. Sometimes it's all right to follow order because we can still have church.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing I would say to that is in that scripture when it said God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and love, but of a sound mind. Sound mind requires that we take factors into consideration that we might not normally take into consideration. And so even as it is today, we must be cognizant of the rules that govern us. And part of those rules, Pastor Queen, as you were sharing, is those that come from the government. And if we're not operating in sound mind, then we are subject to say and or do what we want to do. And why would we do that? Because what that does is that jeopardizes everyone else around us. And that's not, and we have an obligation to protect and to serve our congregants and those that we lead. And doing that requires that we do things in a way that is appropriate for mankind, not for our own selfish desires and judgment. And then the other piece of that you said, Daphne, I wanted to comment on about the balance. I mean, part of that also is that you have to speak those things that you're dealing with into existence, right? And so it's appropriate to, in the midst of this storm that we're in now, that we can't lean to our own understanding.
Right.
Right? And so if you're not leaning to your own understanding, then who do we put our faith and our hope in?
Right.
So in this myth, even though, again, we can't see and don't necessarily know the outcome, but one of the things we do know that we're not going to lean to our own understanding, because that's a scripture that we're based, I mean, that's foundational for us, right?
Right.
And so if we continue to acknowledge God in the midst of this, we know that he's going to see us through it. And so part of the balance for me also is recognizing that there is the side of it that we must be mindful of, but there's also the spiritual side that we can speak into existence, and we have to keep that balance. And I think that's one of the things that we've done. And I mean, I thank God for our lead pastor, you know, as she was even sharing on Sunday, right? I mean, we lay a foundation by first sharing with the community what is going on. And so we brought that sound mind to the conversation on Sunday. But what was that followed up with? We gave praise, right? And so we celebrated, right? That while we're in the midst of this, we're still not going to take down from serving God and from worshiping him.
Right.
Right? So.
Right.
Daphne, a hymnist penned the words, and I love them. Nobody knows this but Pastor K and I. But when the storms of life are raging, stand by me. When the world is tossing me like a ship out on the sea, thou who ruleth winds and water, stand by me. And I take that. I literally take that. That even some storms I caused myself, but he stood by me.
Yeah.
And he kept me. And he sheltered me from the storm. And I give God praise for that.
You said some storms. I thought you was ready to say some songs you make up yourself.
That too.
So one of the biggest storms this country has seen ever, but at the same time, it's one of those storms that I recall drawing people to the church, and that was 9/11.
9/11.
So you remember when they were clearing out the rubble of the towers, and two of the beams, even, they left because it was in the form of a cross. How do you explain to people that even in the midst of a storm, there is God? And sometimes that's the hardest thing to explain as a believer, that something so treacherous, a storm that hit this country, took it to its knees, but we still saw God in it. What's your best way of explaining that to people?
I go with Bishop Paul Morton says, I made it. And out of all that the devil threw at us, we made it. And yes, some saved folk lost their lives. Yes, saved folk. Cannot escape that. But what sought to divide us brought us together. And we became stronger because of a tragic, because of evil. But it didn't destroy us. It made us come together. Ordinarily, people that never came together had to come together for the cause. Believers and unbelievers. And some became believers because God sought to do this. And so I don't understand how and why. Some things I say, you know, even Lord, because, and this is the part that can be difficult for people to embrace, if you will, but we are in a fallen world. We have not, this is not a perfect world. And we are under grace. But the thing of it is that because we're in a fallen world, bad things will happen to good people. But it doesn't mean God isn't God. And it doesn't mean that he's not in it. It doesn't mean that he's not walking us through. It doesn't mean that he won't carry us through the storm. He's still there
And that's where we need to, helping people to understand. And it takes more, to be honest, than a conversation. It takes sitting down and just really talking with someone, and a person, desiring to grow and getting that deeper understanding. Because one thing I do believe and know about God, and that is if you want to know what truth is, and if you want to know if he is truth, ask him, and he will prove it to you. You don't have to go around wondering what is truth. He will show you what truth is. And then understanding that we are in this fallen world. We are in a world where we have to live with the consequences. We are in a world where we're dealing with principalities. We're in a world, again, like we shared on Sunday, we are living in the intersection of the invisible and invisible world. And so, and what we see in the physical world is symptomatic of what's happening in the spiritual world. There's a spiritual component behind everything. And so when we come to that understanding, then when we are faced with a storm like this, we don't run and go, why God, why? There must not be a God if you're going to allow this to happen, when you can come to this place of understanding that, no, God doesn't cause everything, but he doesn't stop everything either, but he will bring you through everything. And again, your coming through may not be what you want. And I think that's, for me, that's about the best way I can square that up to help someone, because that's a deep question. Yeah.
I think the one thing I would add as well is, during that time, and most of us, I think, Daphne, you may have said this as part of your opening, in a number of the tragedies that we've experienced, as we look back on them, we can remember where we were, what we were doing, and it's interesting that some of the real storms of life are the ones that we can remember even more precisely than other moments in life, right? And so in fact, sometimes you can remember the details about a storm more than you can remember those about a celebration. Right. The things that you were blessed with, the things that you were pleased with, the good things that happened in your life. And so that's interesting in that as we go through life, our focus oftentimes allows us to bring back to memory the things that created more reminders, more alarms in our lives. But it's also a reminder that because of the things that we were able to wrestle through and that we were able to come through, it's also indicative of the God that we serve. Because it is in the good times that we oftentimes don't always reflect, but it's most often during the trying times that we're reminded of just who God is and how awesome the God is that we serve. And so when we remember about the things of 9/11, and for me at the time, I happened to be in D.C. and in my office and in my office building, I could literally see across the city into the Pentagon and see the smoke that was uprising from there as I was watching television. And so those sharp memories are still vivid. And not being able to leave my building, but deciding that, no, I'm going to do what I have to do. And so we talked about sound mind earlier. Well, in that particular case, at that particular time, it wasn't quite sound mind, because I did some things that, truth be told, I probably violated a few of the local laws, if you would. But that's okay. I needed to do what I needed to do at the time. And we have more time in the future. I'll tell you about some of those things that we did. But there were a lot of people, right? I mean, coming out of D.C. trying to get home, people literally were walking 10, 15 miles to get out of the city. Yeah. Because, again, it was such a panic in not knowing what we were faced with, not knowing what to expect next. We were all in this state of panic. And what does that do? Panic leads to fear. Where are we now? with COVID-19.
Right.
Panic, which leads to fear, right? And so we're dealing with the same things, but the fact that we went through something like that in 9/11, and the things that had happened as a result of that, I think this is a time for us to reflect back on those, right? Pastor Queen, you said God united us, brought us together more, right? And if you look at what's happening now, we are really operating out of a premise that, are we truly our brother's keeper?
Right.
Tonight, it's not a coincidence that we are sitting 6 feet apart from each other.
Right.
Right? I mean, we're doing the things that we are being asked to do, right? Based on the information that we've received.
But still trust God.
But still trust God. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's important for us to know as Christians, is that we can operate in a world, be in the world, but not be always of the world.
That's right. Anoint your house, but wash your hands.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Love it, Pastor. Love it.
Go ahead and anoint your house, but you need to wash your hands.
Right, at the same time.
At the same time. Yeah.
And you mentioned, Pastor D, we remember the storms, right? But it's 9 times out of 10, the storms of our life, whether they're national, whether they're congregational, whether they're individually, those storms are what put things in place that shift us. There are things that occurred as a result of 9/11 that we can't go back to pre-9/11. It changed our everyday. So we remember those things that shifted us. But to your point, we sometimes forget the positive part on that. So with that shift, what do you remember your biggest shift being as a part of the storm of 9/11?
Personal shift? I mean,
Either
because
one.
it definitely was a national, no, it was a global shift, because we don't even, how we try to board a plane now, and what you can carry on the plane, and that was a shift that had several shifts, because if you remember, first you could carry, have liquids, but then after the guy with the shoe, and you had the bomb in the shoe, now you got to take your shoes off and all like that. So that was definitely a paradigm shift for us, globally speaking, because you look at kids who born after 9/11, they don't know anything about that. They don't know anything about going to the airport and going through the gate and watching somebody leave from the gate. That's not happening. So I think with each storm, when you look back over it, you got the 9/11. No, back up. We can go back to Johnson, March 9th. From that storm, we learned you need a succession plan.
Yeah.
You got to have something in place.
Right.
And so with each one, you learn from that and how to move forward, and I think what we're going to learn, this is another paradigm shift that we're going into now, that hopefully people, what they're asking us to do now is basically what we should have been doing anyway,
Right.
is wash your hands.
It's not rocket science.
It's not rocket science. You don't need a vaccine to wash your hands. But, I mean, so hopefully I heard one, it was on one of the news release today, and they were saying that hopefully from this people will change until next year when flu season come around, it won't be as extensive because people will now be in the habit of properly washing our hands with soap and water and so forth. So I think with each storm, there comes a paradigm shift. I mean, when you look at the DC sniper, of course, that brought us where you'd be more conscious and aware of who's around you, even though that wasn't as much as some of the others. When you look at the financial crisis, you become mindful of how you manage your money. You become more conscious of, the percentage rates and so forth as far as buying a home, so you just tend to be a little bit more careful. And I think this time around, as we're looking, I know one paradigm shift for me personally, I'm going to make sure I'm going to keep stocked up
On the essentials.
on my essentials, you know what I mean? Even though I'm good, but I'm just saying, you just kind of learn and you're just kind of going in that category. But I think that's it.
And some storms aren't necessarily to change, but to put things back in line. Because when you talked about the financial crisis, part of that, because we were so far to one side, that we needed that storm in order to bring us back and to pull the covers off of some.
Because some storm, there was one storm, the one during 2008 actually saved us.
Yes, but it didn't feel like it.
It didn't feel like it.
But it saved us. You're talking about the refi?
Yes, from a bigger storm.
Right.
And so some things, just like in life when you on the road and you get a detour, and you look on the news, it was a reason why you had that detour. That because if you had went that way, 911 taught me this: bus, train, or boat. And that was my shift. Bus, train, or boat.
That was your shift.
And if the car can't get me to either one of them,
right,
then that's was my shift.
And he sticks with that because he's still not a fan.
All I need is an amen.
He's not a fan of the boat.
I just need one amen.
He's not a fan of the boat or the train, to be honest.
All right, so as we get close to winding up, right, so we are in the middle of yet another storm, but Pastor K, you said different storm, same God.
Yep.
Right? So different storm, same God.
Same God.
Pastor D, what does different storm, same God mean to you?
In essence, it comes down to we serve a God that does not change. His word says he's immutable, and he cannot lie. And so when we put our trust in him, and when we put our hope in him, then we know with extreme confidence that the things that he said he's going to do, they will, without a shadow of a doubt, come to pass. And I think to members of this congregation, one of the things that you can rest in is knowing that the God we serve, who sometimes we say who sits high and looks low, but the things that he promises us, they will come to pass, and we can lean on that. And so those words ring with me because when we talk about a God that does not change, for me, that means everything. That is, when I go to God in confidence, I know that I'm serving one who will bring to pass what he says he will bring to pass. And that's where my confidence and my hope lies.
Yep. Amen. Pastor Queen, same, different storm, same God. 5
words.
Okay.
I know my Redeemer liveth.
Amen. All right. Pastor K, you want me to go first and then you can close this out?
Okay.
So different storm, same God. I kind of like your quote. It's one of my favorite quotes, actually, that when I can't see his hand, trust his heart. Yeah. And I trust the fact that he's going to see me through this storm because he did see me through the last one.
Yep. Well, I'll just leave this for all of our viewers and for all of us who are here. And we just hope that you were able to get some encouragement out of what we shared today, and that you got some hope and some comfort. But let me just share with you from Isaiah 43. And he says this in Isaiah 43, he says, when you pass through the waters, I'll be with you. Now we're going to go through the water. He didn't say we weren't going to get wet. He said, when I pass through the waters, I'll be with you. And when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. And when you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze. We're going to go through, but he's going to be with us. He's going to bring us out on the other side. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy does come in the morning. And coming from Psalm 34:17, it says, the righteous cry out, and the Lord hears them, and he delivers them from all of their troubles. And so we're just going to rest on that God will deliver us through all of our troubles. And so you can take that to the bank. We're going to be okay. Just do what we're supposed to do. Be practical, but be spiritual. And we will make it out on the other side, and we will be talking about this years down the road. So thank you for coming in and hanging out with us for a while. We would ask you to check in, if you will, here on Facebook, and just to let us know, hey, are you okay? Do you need anything? So we need to just use this as a way of communicating with you. So thanks again for being here, and come back on Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. We're going to have some more praise music here, and we're just going to gather, and we're just going to worship God with a new norm and a new paradigm. Take care. God bless you.